morning and welcome everybody to Mothers Against Addiction and our weekly guest speaking engagement. My name is Cassie King. I will serve as your moderator today. If you're new here to Mothers Against Addiction, we are so excited to have you. Mothers Against Addiction, we are here with a purpose to offer free access to high quality, educational based presentations and speakers that are relevant and meaningful to our Mothers Against Addiction community. Today we have our guest speaker, Mr. Pete Salazar Jr. We're very excited to hear what he has to say to us. Before we get started and I pass it over to him, I just wanted to run down a few quick reminders for the group. First of all, we want to make sure that we are preserving everybody's confidentiality today. As you saw when you joined, we will be recording. But the three of us that are pinned here in the meeting will be the only ones with our faces being shared. So myself as the moderator, Mr. Pete Salazar Jr. as our guest speaker, and our interpreter will also be pinned for your convenience. If you would like to interject with a question or a comment for our speaker, you are more than welcome to do so throughout the presentation today. You can either type it in the chat and I will verbally speak it out loud, or you can use the raise hand function found at the bottom of the Zoom window today, and we will unmute you so you can speak for yourself. Should you choose to speak, your voice will be recorded, but not your face. So I want you to be assured that we will continue to preserve your confidentiality in that way. Without further ado, I would love to introduce you to our guest speaker. So like I said, his name is Mr. Pete Salazar Jr. Regarding his background, he specializes in evaluating program and program management for profit and nonprofit women's veterans that struggle particularly with PTSD, substance abuse issues, and people with disabilities. Pete has cerebral palsy and he leads and advocates for barrier-free living for people with disabilities. He feels that there's an importance of addressing addiction issues among mothers, particularly those who are veterans or have disabilities. He's coming to us today with a topic of helping us all understand addiction from a more holistic perspective. Pete, I'll hand it over to you to tell us a little bit about the unique challenges that mothers struggling with addiction may face.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Yeah, specifically with mothers and veterans, it really goes into the definition of how you see yourself. I think the VA did a study, and I think the number was maybe 30% of female veterans don't consider themselves veterans because of what their particular job was. So I think they felt if they didn't go overseas and fight or in the combat unit, somehow that kind of took away from their service, and that's completely wrong. And that's what we're fighting, going uphill, making sure those women that did serve their country and that are veterans, make sure that they understand that they were part of a bigger force and a bigger movement and get those services that are needed for them. You know, particularly when it comes to mothers, mothers by definition always put themselves for other people. So it's really not only attacking those two spots, but also understanding that self-care is involved, and that can be more than just going to the VA and getting a pill or this or that, but really introducing holistic practices and getting that support groups that are needed for us to run our day-to-day and progress as we see fit and as we need.
Absolutely. Could you tell us a little bit about empowering mothers specifically with disabilities?
Well, I think it's almost a conversation that needs to be needed to be said, that it's okay. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to need things. It's okay to pursue support, because I mean you're coming at it in two different ways. You're coming in as a veteran, which is the mantra is always go for the mission, always complete the mission, and you come in for it as a mother. I mean, most mothers are the focal point of every family, so you have both of those concepts and those feelings of being responsible and being self-resilient that helps you out in your service and then in your day-to-day life, but somehow it kind of hinders when you need to take a break, when you need to ask for help, when you need support of others. So it's understanding that dichotomy and making sure that there's pathways and paths for people to pursue the help that they need.
Can you tell us a little bit more about accessing resources or support systems for mothers with disabilities or mothers who are veterans?
Well, I think we just need to define what support is and help. Too often, we're used to going to our doctors or primary care physicians, giving them a list of ailments and then getting the script for medication. And yes, that's helpful in some things, but it requires a multi-pronged approach. And that's why my organization, United States Disabled Veterans, is taking more of a holistic approach, because you need more than a 30-minute consultation with your doctor in some fields. You need an actual support system, an actual understanding of groups over time, unpacking some of those experiences, some of those emotions that got you to a certain point in a certain element, whatever that may be. So that's what we're primarily focused on.
Sounds like you're really focusing on creating more inclusive programming that considers some needs. Are there some best practices that you could talk about today for us?
Well, so as you see, I'm in kind of a camping setting right now because we took time to kind of create a questionnaire, create a process that really helps people answer questions for 90 minutes with a one-on-one therapist or clinician that unpacks some of those issues. And then based on those outcomes and those responses, they get a personal plan that's solely developed for them one-on-one. And then their treatment and progress can start and be more in depth.
Are there any strategies for providing those tailored supports and resources that you can talk about this morning?
I mean, it really goes into the individual understanding what traumas they may have experienced. And then it's not necessarily during their time of service. It can be something that happened in their childhood, and then it could be something that happened after that. But we have to understand we're a culmination of our experiences. And too often, medicine and treatment is seen more as a business, get them in, get them out, rather than unpacking the emotions and traumas and the necessities of the individual.
Does anybody have questions for Pete about how we can empower mothers or support them who may have disabilities or be veterans? Pete, could you talk a little bit then more about navigating some of the public policies that might be affecting mothers in this area?
I think the public policy part of it is that they're trying to create, like, we're going to have the legislative session coming there. So there's really aspects of it, even in education. If you look at it in the state of Texas, the governor is asking for educational vouchers for people for private schools and things of that nature. And at its face, it speaks to accessibility, but there's special programs that go into students with disabilities that, like if you go to a public school, it follows you and makes sure that there's not only programming in place, but there's adaptive solutions to a certain treatment of a child, a certain educational process. I mean, how that affects mothers too. If you have a child like that and you're taking this program and you're putting it in a private school necessarily doesn't have to provide that access. So they can say, hey, we got little Johnny here. He has whatever disability, cerebral palsy, autism, whatever. Then they go and they get the funding. They do it for a month and they're like, oh, we're not the spot for you. And then they move on. That affects, mental health of mothers and everything also, because like I said, mothers are the focal point of the family unit, and that doesn't change. And that's just in addition to a mother's own self-care and things of that nature. I mean, so policy-wise, anything that affects students, children at its face is going to affect mothers, veteran mothers, all those aspects, because they truly are the focal point of the family in various lives.
The importance of advocacy and public awareness.
I think we just need to make sure that our lawmakers know secondary and tertiary effects on the laws in which they create. For an example of this kind of overflows into disability rights, but the city of Boston just changed how it regulates group housing. And so it's opened up to such an effect that there's more people that can have it. And you would think, oh, that just provides more access, but it raises the rates of what people can charge and how it's defined, which makes it almost impossible for people that are in disabilities with a stream, like a local stream of income, to live in groups and communities that have an effective housing situation.
We have a question in the chat. So it says, my question for Pete would be, what has your experience been with the VA hospital system? My friends who've served their country like yourself have always been frustrated with it.
Well, in my work as clinical case management and working with other nonprofits, I worked under a series of grants. One of them was the SSVF grant, which is Supportive Service for Veterans and their families. And normally, the sharing apparatus at the VA to a non-VA member is so antiquated that if you needed to get information on a particular patient, it was very hard to even get those permissions. They could give you like a screenshot of a specific item or thing that has to do with that veteran because of the HIPAA laws. So it makes communication very hard to have and to do. So when I was working, I was one of the few people that were allowed to take VA clients in a different program and be their case manager, so I could have more accessibility and have the abilities to help.
Could you speak to a little bit more of the addiction risk factors that we may see by mothers with disabilities or who are veterans?
I think to understand addiction it's basically trying to self-medicate. You have to understand that veterans who fought in combat specifically were in a fight or flight mode at a level that very few non-military people access. And they accessed that for over years at a time. You got to understand that the Iraq-Afghanistan war lasted 20 years. We tripled our deployments from that of Vietnam. In Vietnam, your average combat soldier maybe had 1 or 2 deployments. The average tours in Iraq and Afghanistan were like 5 to 6. So imagine being at that level over time. And then you get out. So then you're so used to being amped up in that situation. You're so used to having a unit. You know, that's your world. Your unit is your world, your sports system. People that got your back, they watch your six. And then you come back to civilian society and all those aspects are gone. So how do you replace that? How do you bridge that gap? How do you deal with your trauma? And that's when you get people looking for that next high, that next thing, and that goes into bigger depths of those things and trying to bridge those relationship gaps.
We have another question in the chat. It reads, how do you think this would affect veterans given that they come from unit-based systems to going straight into apartment by themselves?
So I think what they're speaking to that is, so for treatment now, it's called housing first. So about when I first started around 2005, 2006, you had what you called readiness. So there were certain requirements that the individual client would have to do to get ready. So I particularly dealt with people coming from the streets that were addicted, combat veterans that had substance abuse issues. So we had a readiness for 30 days for them to work on their own personal supports, whether that be AA, NA, whatever. I had 30 days to help them build those support systems. Now with the housing first model that's adopted by the HUD and everything of that nature, in order to get funded, you just put people in housing and then you try to catch them where they're at and just kind of let them guide themselves in their own policies and treatments and things of that nature. But the problem with that is everybody thinks they're the smartest man in the room. So if you had some issues initially, then there's no kind of self-reflection, no kind of time to do that internal work that can put you on the other side of something. You're in a house, but you're in a house by yourself. So you're doing the exact same behaviors that you were doing in the streets. So yeah, it's great. You have a house, but you're still isolating. You're still self-medicating. You're still doing all these other things. And that I think that if they were addressed beforehand, that would make your housing situation, your transition, more successful.
A lot of what you're speaking to is leaning towards maybe more collaborative approach of care for mothers or those that may be experiencing getting out of the military and making that transition. Can you talk to us a little bit more about collaborative models of care?
Well, that's what I think. I think we need to think outside. I know it's said a million times, we need to think outside the box. I know we have a linear focus on treatment. You know, you go, you try to understand the symptoms, you try to diagnose, and then you give pills and medicate. I think it's like I said before, it's multi-pronged. It's more of an unpacking rather than a removal. You have to unpack various aspects, and that takes more time. That takes more time investment, not only from doctors, not only from clinicians, but also our community in general. We need to understand that we need to invest in community partnerships, in conversations to be that support that doesn't necessarily go to a specialization of a doctor or something like that. It's having layers of community response. I know for the Texas Veterans Commission, one of their big pushes is that peer-to-peer support, and they offer training for other veterans that are coming out to get that peer-to-peer training so they can be a secondary and tertiary level of that support also.
We have another question that has popped up in the chat for you. What is the Great Divide and how does it affect rural areas and addictions?
I think if you look at traditional models of treatment, you have these big, large VA hospitals or any kind of hospital entity to go in there, be checked out, and be seen. If you're looking at rural access, going to a hospital from Austin to Temple's an hour. Doing that in Lubbock, the Panhandle, whenever, that's where you get your aspects of it. And like I said, if we refocus on our understanding, we refocus on the models of care. There's no reason why we shouldn't have support groups in American Legions in the VA, within their own communities, and having telemedicine or holistic approaches where people can use the technologies we have to have that one-on-one support. But that takes an investment in technologies into those rural areas. And I think when you're examining the total budgets of, okay, this is what we want, this is how we want to help veterans, you need that technology piece investment, but you also need the holistic medicine investment as well, rather than just building up this multi-layered of, institutions with all the red tape.
Pete, this is Elias. I'm curious what nonprofits really are doing the best at addressing the problems. You can share with us maybe a few or one that you really like that are doing really good work.
Well, I didn't get there in front when we started. It was called USDV to start United States Disabled Veterans Abroad, because we were focusing on veterans that lived abroad. And then as we were doing our work there, organizations like American JA Forum reached out and combined arms, and they were saying that there was stuff in country that needed support and help. And so that's why we kind of refocused our results for United States Disabled Veterans. And then when we had the fall of Afghanistan, we had over 35,000 unaccompanied minors coming into to Texas. So at that time, I was working for the Center for Survivors of Torture. Because of my nonprofit work on the side as well, I was able to coordinate interpreters and the Texas response to that particular event. But it was because I had established partnerships with American GI Forum, Combined Arms, and, all these United States U.S. vets at Las Vegas that I worked there before through AmeriCorps. that we were able to coordinate our response as one focused unit, so to speak.
We have another comment from the chat. It says, "Thank you for your impactful work, Pete. How can your tools for women veterans be adapted to support mothers with children facing addiction or in regular family settings? Could you provide an example of a holistic tool you use?"
I think one of them is just we're developing a questionnaire that we're using. Like your normal questionnaire from a VA or whenever, it takes 30 minutes. It's primarily used for funding purposes. Most of your questionnaires are used to get responses to your funders to show that you're doing your job. I mean, the ones that we're developing, again, are really there to unpack some of the traumas that they speak so that the clinician or the holistic coach can really see what is kind of the driving force behind that. And I think that's some of the things that I used when I primarily did my AmeriCorps work with U.S. Veterans Initiative, that I saw that dealing with female veterans, a lot of mothers that were estranged from their children, it wasn't just the time of the service, but it was back that started in their childhood, understanding those aspects, unpacking that. Then how did that lead you into your life's journey? And then once you understand that, you can kind of redefine that as how did that affect your relationship as a mother with your children? And understanding that helps you create a plan for betterment, whatever that means to the individual. But you have to understand those aspects to get to that point and that level.
I think that brings an excellent point. A lot of the things you've talked about this morning has included bringing lots of people together in a collaborative way. And one of the things we try and do here at Mothers Against Addiction is foster a sense of community. Could you talk a little bit more about peer support networks, specifically for mothers that may be veterans?
Well, I think that's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. We have to work to get more of those out there. I know there's like 3 or 4 groups and they meet, but as a whole, the women, mother, veteran community is not boisterous. They're not out there, waving flags, letting themselves be known. So we have to be those advocates. We have to be those people saying, hey, you belong, connecting them together, making a movement where we interconnect with one another and we make it a priority. I think that's when, if we evaluate things, if we evaluate care, if we evaluate what motherhood is, it's about making a concerted effort to highlight this aspect and make sure that mothers across the country and the world know that their place in life is so sacrosanct that it needs to be a national priority.
The importance of mentorship and shared experiences through people's journey of recovery.
Well, I think if people, it's two-pronged. I think transitioning out of the military is its own kind of aspect and battle and service, but then there's also sobriety and how that looks at the day-to-day. You combine both of them, it's a great challenge, but seeing somebody that's actually done one or the other or both is imperative, because there are going to be pitfalls, there are going to be kind of traps and mistakes, but to know how to maneuver those is going to make you more successful. And I think that's why we have to continue the community conversation and make alternative methods to treatment, like holistic treatments, more of an acceptable reality. So they have more options, they have more tools in their toolbox to make this journey happen.
For any of our listeners this morning, they may be wondering how they can support a loved one, a child, or a family member that is transitioning out of the military, maybe has some addiction or disability concerns. What tips do you have for how they can best support their loved one through this journey, since they don't have a shared experience that you talked about?
I think for the most part, you just have to be open to the conversation, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's not like you're doing a one-on-one right off the bat. You just have to let that person that you care about know that you see them, you see that kind of some issues, and that you're open to start a conversation when they're ready. And allowing that bridge, allowing that process. You can't force anybody to have a aha moment, but you can allow the conversation to start and that stream of support to be there for when they're ready to initiate that conversation.
One of the things you focus on a lot is educational outreach and workshops. Is there anything you'd like to tell us about that?
I just think I'm trying to make it an appointment here with my team now and in the future to come to really bring in new tools for talking to veterans and giving aid to people that are in this situation. And we're going to be working on that. And my new branding of the organization is United States Disabled Veterans. And we're going to bring out these tools for the community to use. We're partnering with established clinicians and partners to kind of bring this out to the forefront, to the mainstream. So I would just say stay tuned. More help's coming and more tools are coming for everybody in the issue.
Maybe we're specific that we can find some of those tools, or any sneak peek you can give us about a skill or a coping mechanism that you're hoping to bring out.
I would just say when you're dealing with mental health, focus on the community for more, focus on holistic treatments. And like I said, we'll have those tools for you as they come out. I'll make sure I give some to Eva that she can distribute to y'all as you should use. That's why I'm here right now, because we're really fine-tuning what we want those aspects to be so they can be useful for everybody in a variety of societies.
Are there any calls to action or a conclusion you want to make before we really open it up for final questions this morning?
I would just say don't be satisfied with the status quo, because the status quo was designed to be an industry to make money. And we know that people are very complex. We're resilient beyond measure. And it's really, as a community, tapping into those aspects, tapping into things that are community-based, that is going to make us more impactful and more successful over time.
To open it up to anyone for questions, you can use the raise your hand function if you'd like to speak your question, or you can put it in the chat as well, and we'll read it out loud on your behalf. People are typing, Pete, I would love to know any specific risk factors you think are on the table for specifically mothers who are veterans that our audience members can look out for in their loved ones.
I would just say isolation, and it may not be just somebody locking themselves in a room, but it can be making sure that there's time for reflection, making sure you do things and like just to hear to listen. I mean, we get so caught up in the day-to-day that, somebody's cooking, somebody's cleaning like they normally do. Everything is normal. But that normal may not be normal, so to speak. You got to make sure that you take time to take kind of the temperature of somebody and be like, are you doing okay? Even that question. Even if there's nothing that kind of arises, hey, I just want to check in with you, making sure everything's all right. And that would prompt more. And we can do that. And it can help us.
It sounds like you're speaking a little bit to a role of really understanding people in their recovery process and empathy. Are there any other tips you have along those lines for someone that's supporting a loved one?
So I know here in Texas, we have a thing called the Texas Veterans Network. And it's a coalition of all these nonprofits. And if you're a veteran, you can register and just kind of put what you need. And it kind of shoots those businesses and those aspects that come in to help that veteran. And then I think there's a 48-hour response time that everybody that participates in this network has to do.
Looks like that goes right along with one of our questions in the chat, but are there any other resources for help that you would like to throw out there to our group today?
Like I said the Texas Ventures Network. I mean, if you just need general help, you can always dial 311 and they can kind of give you aspects. But like I said, as we doing the holistic approaches is relatively new in the nonprofit world, so we're trying to streamline those accesses to that and build those relationships. I've been in talks with organizations like American GI Forum and all those aspects. The American GI Forum is a good organization. They're the oldest veterans self-help agency. But I mean, I think United States Disabled Veterans is really taking the role to kind of heads forward and kind of streamline these holistic approaches and to really show them that it can really be done. And we're working with a variety of partners to prove that to not only America, but the VA and the world as a whole.
We had another question in the chat. We all need grants. How can we streamline our grant writing process?
Well, we're also working with a variety of partners that have kind of are on the forefront of grant writing using technologies, and that's something that we're going to help unfold to the nonprofit world, where it streamlines the time that it takes you to write a grant. So I think your average time for a grant is usually anywhere from 3 to 6 hours, depending on the amount of questions that they have and the format of that. We're working with various providers to streamline that. We have a friend of ours that has specific technologies that they are running out to help your smaller nonprofits that are federally known to get that grant knowledge and that usage. And I look forward to inviting them and unfolding how we're going to use those technologies to support and then couple that with holistic treatment.
Comment in the chat that said, if you're not a veteran, it's hard to get help. Any thoughts about or responses to that?
I would say there is a number of communities out there, but it's just really bringing mental health and that caring for mental health and giving that mental health first aid at the forefront. And just in general, as communities, I think we need to highlight that. And I've been working with some of the veterans communities to kind of bridge that gap, to show things that worked, best practices, and how do we bring that into like regular society, so to speak.
Is there any way that Mothers Against Addiction or those of us listening today could collaborate with the VA?
I would say collaborate with others that do a similar work, so then that can be more of a focal point when they have to deal with the VA.
You mentioned mental health first aid. Could you tell us?
I do that. So traditionally, mental health first aid is like, you would say, like anything. If you see somebody in crisis, there's a series of questions and there's like a placing system to kind of see where they're at initially in their point of trauma and experience to bring them down. When I'm talking about mental first aid, I'm talking about just having those community supports and making that conversation and access more known. So it's like, yeah, if you're having a mini crisis for whatever reason you got triggered, then it's all right to go to the side for 30 minutes, have a cup of tea, and have somebody speak to that. But I think as a community, we try to stay linear focused on our own thing. So when we see somebody in trouble, it's a lot easier just to continue walking or walk away or do something else, or just make an excuse of why we're not being there or addressing the situation that we see. I think if we understand more holistic approaches, then we're more in tune to start that conversation. Because if something were to happen, everybody's first response is there a doctor in the house? Because we keep that so finite. That's just for these educated people with multiple degrees. But in the holistic process, it's just being an ear, it's being a resource. And I think what our organization tries to do, United States Disabled Veterans, is create those programs, create that training where everybody can at least start to be that first piece that goes into that second piece. And so we have the tools to kind of engage in the conversation. And that's what we're going to be running out as well.
Another one come up in the chat. How many women veterans in our nation or local undergo suicide prevention due to PTSD that go through addictions? It seems like you have international knowledge as well. What does that look like for a vet who migrates here? Also, USDV could collaborate with us against addiction.
Well, see, so that's the thing. Like, it has another rolling aspect. So they said 30%. When asked, the VA did a study, and they said 30% of veterans, female veterans who served, didn't see themselves as veterans just because they were in combat or traditional roles that are known in the military. And that doesn't speak to the suicide rate, but it speaks to a mindset. And I think I couldn't tell you the suicide rate for female veterans is maybe 3% of what. So the total suicide rate right now is about 22 a day. It was last year. 22 a day was the standard for the last couple of years, but they figured it doubled, or it may have been 32 now. So if you take 2% of that, but I think the bigger conversation point is, why do around 30% of our female veterans not see themselves as veterans? Where is that? And then how can we address that? Because if we address that, then we address perspectives and treatment and understanding.
Open for questions if anyone has any other questions before we wrap up today. Are there any personal insights or success stories you would like to talk about, Pete?
I can say that over time and my work of almost 20 years, I think I've helped resettle 1,000 families, and that goes from SIVs to veterans to the chronically homeless and the formerly incarcerated. But with all the different demographics and people I work with from other countries, veterans and formerly incarcerated and stuff, there's one principle that has stayed true, and that is everybody wants to live a life of purpose and a life of consequence. And if we understand that, then we can help everyone, despite the categories we put in front of us.
We have a raised hand. Christina, you can unmute if you would like to ask your question or comment.
So unmute. Hey, Pete. How are you doing?
Hello. Pleasure.
Nice to see you. And wonderful to hear you talking about policy, because, a lot of moms end up getting involved in policy, and a lot of family members get involved in policy because they see, okay, the system is broken, and people like you are working to help fix that system. So what I was thinking about when you were talking is I have been reading a lot about how men communicate with one another versus women. And I thought this might be applicable for a lot of moms versus, when you're looking at your male child, your male family member versus your female family member. I do think the communications styles are different, especially when there's trauma involved. There's a lot of emotion involved. And you mentioned just at checking in and just asking them if they're all right. And it does tend to be a short exchange between men. I mean, just so that we can understand how male veterans are processing and how family members might talk to them, because it's been my experience that women think they need to talk a lot to heal. I mean, do you understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah.
So how do you recommend, is there a different style in talking to your male family members about how they're doing?
Yeah.
I think it's having the knowledge to kind of move yourself out of the way and provide for those other support systems. For example, our holistic coach and our clinicians are both females, because I know, despite my experience of how I worked in case management for 20 years and stuff, it takes something different. And that's why I actively pursued these people that are specialists in their field and or the Mets, because I know there's this perspective that I can bring, but there's other elements, particular to female veterans, that need to be served, and that's why I pursued these knowledge experts. And I think there's a certain humility that needs to bring in with that. And over the years, I was able to have my own introspection and say, there's other elements here that I could never connect to or understand, and I need to find those special people, those great people that can bridge that gap.
I wanted to say I agree with you 100%. It's been nice. The same with working within the community. You were talking about humility. There was this feeling that other people feel that they're better than you if they hadn't been through addiction. And that's a very sensitive area for a lot of people. And again, the other thing that you were addressing was letting professionals deal with it, because there's a lot of background that they have, knowledge about how the mind works, how addiction works. It's so vital to have. I mean, a lot of times we think we can heal our family, but we need help. And there's nothing wrong with having that community support. Now, that being said, when you're dealing with your person and you're trying to find out if your person's okay, and there's a lot of talking necessary in the beginning with some people. Have you been noticing there's some people just asking them, just checking in and saying, how you doing? Is that enough? Sometimes
I think it's a start, but I think you really need to pay attention to the verbal cues, the responses, and you may need to follow up in there, or you may say, hey, I heard about this meeting or this group over here. Why don't we check it out together? But when I say, how are you doing? I'm not just saying that phrase. When I say it, I'm saying be an active listener, like really be open, because people can really understand. There's a difference from me saying, are you okay? Or are you okay? And like really stopping to be open for that response. And it may take 10 times before somebody says, okay, this person like really does care. And if it does take that, then it takes that. But I know it goes against our nature as human beings, because we want to go from A to B. But really being open, really being an active listener, being really a community support, that's where the journey starts. That's just the start. It's not your job to get them over the finish line, but you can help them start the journey.
This morning, you've talked a lot about the importance of continued support for mothers that are impacted by addiction, and how there's some specific overlap for mothers that have been in the military or support someone that has been in the military. We've talked a lot about encouragement to engaging with advocacy efforts and community resources. As we kind of get to a close this morning, are there any closing remarks you would like to make?
I would just say there's a thing, and it says this: are we willing to give up who we are for what we can become? And I believe that applies to our treatment, not only for veterans, but for everyone. Are we willing to give up our fundamental ideas now for what we can create for the future? And it seems so simple, but that is one of the hardest jumps you can make, or one of the hardest questions you can answer. Because if it's yes, then that outlies more work to do. But that's the question that we own, not just ask ourselves, but we should be asking others. We collectively, are we willing to give up what we've done for what we can do? Thank you.
Absolutely. Are there any closing invitations you would like to share, or resources?
I would just say I'm right now, this whole weekend was dedicated to creating those resources right now, and we will be unrolling them throughout the next coming months. I will make sure y'all are in the loop. we will create a page on our new website to make sure that everybody can use our resources. And I look forward to working together with you all. Thank you so much.
We really appreciate your time this morning and the wonderful wealth of knowledge that you bring to the table. And Mothers Against Addiction definitely looks forward to continuing to collaborate with you and share those resources as you share them with us so we can continue to work together for this community that we're building. As we close today, I do want to genuinely thank everybody for their thoughtful questions and their participation. We have a survey link in the chat if anyone would like to fill it out. That helps us a lot continue to improve these speaking engagements. I want to definitely thank everyone that is new to us at Mothers Against Addiction and everyone that's returning. I hope that you all can come back. We have these speaking engagements every week. It is on a Saturday at 10 a.m. via Zoom, Central Standard Time. You can find more information about that on our website. You can also, if you check out our website, find a place to donate if that speaks to your heart this morning. You can get a cool t-shirt, potentially. Check out our website. We also have a forum that you can continue the conversation specifically about topics that Mr. Pete Salazar Jr. talked about, but anything related to mothers, families, and the crossover with addiction. For all the mothers, we have a Mother's Share as well. I want to put in a really quick plug for. Currently, those are at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time on a Monday via Zoom as well. You can find the link for that and future iterations of our guest speaker also on the website, so you can sign up. The Saturday guest speakers will continue to include a variety of topics, shared stories, experts in the industry, and perspectives from all walks of life. So we look forward to you continuing to join us for these. And the Mother's Share is more targeted for mothers, where we share our related crossroads with addiction and how that specifically impacts us as mothers. So please continue to join us in those engagements. I appreciate all of you for joining us and hope that everyone has a lovely day and weekend, and you all stay blessed. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, Cassie. Thank you, Monica. You guys have a great weekend. I'll see you.
You as well. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you so much, everyone. Bye. It was amazing.
People are filling out the survey. For those, I'll stay on a little longer.